And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today is January the 29th. My computer went into business for itself. There we go. The 29th day of the year. And it's only 336 days remain to the year's over with, and we'll get to start a new year. Holidays and observances. National Puzzle Day. RNLISOS Day. It's an event celebrated annually to support the Royal National Lifeboat Institution, but it has its own special day. National Cornchip Day, Curmudgeon's Day, National Carnation Day, Free Thinkers Day, Korean New Year, Lunar New Year, Chinese New Year, Family Mediation Week, National School Choice Week, Snow Sculpting Week. Now, one of my favorites is the Cordova Ice Worm Festival Week. If you've never seen an ice worm, you're not alone. They're found at Antarctica. Famous people born in this state: Tom Selleck, Catherine Ross, Sarah Gilbert, William McKinley, and Adam Lambert. January 29th is part of January, Dry January, Manuary, where you get to embrace your inner lumberjack. National Blood Donor Month, Veganary, Thyroid Awareness Month, National Birth Defects Awareness Month, Cervical Cancer Awareness Month, National Slow Cooking Month, Bread Machine Baking Month, National Clean Up Your Computer Month, and a National Brain Teaser Month, National Be On Purpose Month, National Clean Up Your IRS Act Month, National Soup Month, National Skating Month, Fresh Florida Tomato Month, National CBD Month, National Hobby Month, Apple and Apricot Month, National Oatmeal Month, National Bath Safety Month, Clap for Health Month, National Poverty in America Awareness Month, National Black Diamond Month, Get a Balanced Life Month, Get Organized Month, International Creativity Month, Celebration of Life Month, National Be Kind to Food Servers Month, and National Hot Tea Month. Well, on this date in the year 904, Sergius III is elected Pope after coming out of retirement to take over the papacy from the deposed anti-Pope Christopher. 946, Caliph al-Mustaki, blinded, deposed by Uiz al-Dawla, ruler of the Buyid Empire, succeeded by al-Muti as Caliph of the Abbasid Caliphate. 1814, War of the Sixth Coalition. France defeats Russia and Prussia in the Battle of Brienne. 1819, Stanford Raffles lands on the island of Singapore. 1845, The Raven is published by the Evening Mirror in New York. First publication with the name of its author, Edgar Allan Poe. 1850, Henry Clay introduces the Compromise of 1850 to the U.S. Congress. 1856, Queen Victoria issues a warrant under the Royal Sign Manual that establishes the Victoria Cross to recognize acts of valor by British military personnel during the Crimean War. 1861, Kansas is admitted as the 34th U.S. state. 1863, the Bear River Massacre. The detachment of California volunteers, led by Carl Patrick Edward Connor engages Shoshone at Bear River in Washington Territory. Killed hundreds of men, women, and children. 1886, Carl Benz patents the first successful gasoline-driven automobile. 1891, Lili Ukulani is proclaimed the last monarch and only queen regent of the Kingdom of Hawaii. 1907, Charles Curtis of Kansas becomes the first Native American U.S. Senator. 1911, Mexican Revolution. Mexicali is captured by the Mexican Liberal Party, igniting the Magonista Rebellion of 1911. The Magonista Rebellion was an early uprising of the Mexican Revolution organized by the Liberal Party of Mexico, only successful in northern Baja California. It's named after Ricardo Flores Magnon, one of the leaders of the PLM. That's the Partido Liberal Mexicano. The Magonistas controlled Tijuana and Mexicali for about 6 months, beginning with the liberation of Mexicali on January 29, 1911. This rebellion was launched against the rule of Porfirio Diaz, but was put down by forces loyal to Francisco Madero. Acting on a tip from Madero's agents, leaders of the Magonista movement were arrested in the U.S. (1918) Ukrainian-Soviet War. The Bolshevik Red Army, on its way to besiege Kiev, is met by a small group of military students at the Battle of Kruty. 1918, Ukrainian-Soviet War. An armed uprising organized by the Bolsheviks in anticipation of the encroaching Red Army begins at the Kiev arsenal, which will be put down 6 days later. 1936, the first inductees in the Baseball Hall of Fame were announced on this date. 1940, 3 trains on the Shinari line. That's the present Sakurahima line in Osaka, Japan, collide and explode while approaching Ajikawaguchi Station. 181 people are killed. 1943, World War II, first day of the Battle of Renal Island. USS Chicago is torpedoed and damaged by Japanese bombers. 1944, World War II. Approximately 38 people are killed, about a dozen injured when the Polish village of Kronichi in Lithuania, its present day is in Lithuania, it's attacked by Soviet partisan units. 1944, World War II. In Bologna, Italy, the anatomical theater of the Archigonasasio is completely destroyed in an air raid. 1959, the first Melodifestivalen is held in a circus in Stockholm, Sweden. It's an annual song competition organized by Swedish public broadcasters. Determines the country's representative for the Eurovision Song Contest, and it's been held almost every year since 1959. In fact, in the early 2000s, this competition was the most popular television program in Sweden. It's also broadcast on radio and on the internet. 2012 averaged about 3.3 million viewers. And over an estimated 4 million people in Sweden watched the final, almost half the Swedish population. It's the Melodifestivalen, if I pronounced it correctly. 1973, Egypt Air Flight 741. Crashes into the Kyrenia Mountains in Cyprus. Killed 37 people. 1983, Singapore cable car crash. Panamanian registered oil rig, Iniwitak, strikes the cables of the Singapore cable car system linking the mainland and Sentosa Island. Caused 2 cars to crash into the water, killed 7 people, and have 13 others trapped for hours. 1989, Cold War. Hungary establishes diplomatic relations with South Korea, making it the first Eastern Bloc nation to do so. 1991, Gulf War. Battle of Kafishi. First major ground engagement of the wars, or its deadliest, begins between Iraq and Saudi Arabia. 1996, President Jacques Chirac announces a definitive end to French nuclear weapon testing. 2001, thousands of student protesters in Indonesia stormed parliament and demand that President Abdurrahman Rahid resign due to alleged involvement in corruption scandals. 2002, in his State of the Union address, President George W. Bush describes regimes that sponsored terror as an axis of evil. In that axis of evil, he included Iraq, Iran, and North Korea. 2005, the first direct commercial flight from mainland China, from Guangzhou to Taiwan since 1949, arrived in Taipei. Shortly after that, a Chinese Airlines flight lands in Beijing. 2008, an Egyptian court rules that people who do not adhere to one of the three government-recognized religions, while not allowed to list any belief outside of these three, are still eligible to receive government identity documents. 2009, Governor of Illinois, Rod Blagojevich, is removed from office following his conviction of several corruption charges, including solicitation of personal benefit in exchange for an appointment to the U.S. Senate as a replacement for then U.S. President-elect Barack Obama. 2013, as CAT Airlines Flight 760 crashes near the Kazakh city of Almaty, killing 21 people. 2014, Rojava conflict. The Afrin Canton declares its autonomy from the Syrian Arab Republic. And in 2017, a gunman opens fire at the Islamic Cultural Center in Quebec City, kills 6, wounded 19 others in a shooting spree. The Islamic Cultural Center in Quebec City is an organization dedicated to meeting the spiritual, social, and economic needs of the Muslim community. Religion should not be the cause of all the violence that it has become. All right. Breaking news. Jim Acosta announces he's leaving CNN. He urged the viewers not to give in to the lies on his way out. He said, "You may have seen some reports about me in this show, and after giving all this some careful consideration and weighing the alternative time slot CNN offered me, I've decided to move on." He made a name for himself being extremely anti-Trump. His announcement came after days of speculation about his future after he left off CNN's updated programming schedule. His 10 a.m. show was replaced with the Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer and Pamela Brown. He said he would announce his future plans in the coming days. He spent nearly 20 years at CNN with a track record of standing up to authority, standing up for the First Amendment for our journalistic freedoms. The problem is CNN has literally become a joke. Well, the Pittsburgh mayor has declared he's not going to cooperate with ICE on the raids for the undocumented immigrants. He's Pittsburgh and several other so-called sanctuary cities are refusing to cooperate with U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. He says, "I'm not going to be working with ICE. My administration will not work with ICE. We'll do whatever necessary to make our city more welcoming." So they want to protect criminals who broke into this country Kristi Noem, who was confirmed Saturday as Department of Homeland Security Secretary, has joined immigration raids in New York City. She said, just now, enforcement operation in New York City, criminal alien with kidnapping, assault, and burglary charges now in custody thanks to ICE. Gary Peters, Democratic senator from Michigan, going to retire at the end of his current term. That was a state that Trump won. And since nobody listened to him, he said, it's time for me to step down. Sarah Haynes, one of the hosts on The View, admitted to co-host, don't know what Americans think because none of them voted for Trump. And The View has made it its goal to attack Trump. The problem is, more often than not, they have no earthly idea what it is they're talking about. Whoopi Goldberg, of course, was leading the charge that Trump was wrong for wanting the undocumented out of the country. FBI Director nominee Kash Patel broke hostage rescue protocol, according to a whistleblower. He leaked info on a hostage exchange deal. That's according to Senate Democrats. According to the whistleblower letter obtained by Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat of Illinois, claimed Patel leaked news that 2 Americans and the remains of a third are being transferred to U.S. custody from Yemen, who had been held hostage by the Houthi rebels. Whistleblower claimed Patel leaked the news about the trade to the Wall Street Journal hours before the hostages were actually in U.S. custody, which allegedly endangered the deal. The Illinois super mayor, Dalton Mayor Tiffany Henyard, apparently conducted a systematic cover-up of excessive spending. That's the results of a investigation. Costco is refusing to change its woke policies. Apparently, being woke is more important to its management than the future. President Trump has vowed to take back the Panama Canal. The Senate's holding hearings. Bill Gates reveals he was diagnosed with autism as a kid. Kamala Harris's husband, Doug Emhoff, has joined a new law firm, Wilkie, Farr and Gallagher. Somebody's got to make a living in that family, since she doesn't have her influx of money that she had during the campaign. His practice is going to focus on advising corporations, boards of directors, individuals on their most consequential business challenges. The Washington Free Beacon had some interesting observations about him joining the law firm. A trans inmate has sued President Trump over his two sexes order, which cut off taxpayer money for gender therapy. The lawsuit claims that federal trans prisoners will not be safe under President Trump's executive order. This inmate had been receiving taxpayer-funded medical treatments. He's suing the Trump administration and the FBI. Federal Bureau of Prisons, the FBP, challenging the executive order that puts an end to medical transgender treatments for federal prisoners. And he wants to be in a female prison, though he is a he. Selena Gomez, liberal actress, posted a video of her crying about her people and all the children who were threatened by the migrants being evicted. It was eventually taken down, but it's the lunacy we've come to expect from the liberal left. Huntington Beach in California wants to reject sanctuary status. They don't want to be a sanctuary city for undocumented immigrants anymore. President Trump wants an iron dome over the U.S. similar to the one Israel has used, which would be a very good move. Washington Post cited a pro-Palestinian group as being a charity, the same group that the government declared a sham charity for terroristic organizations. National school districts having to answer why there were no metal detectors on the schools, which might have delayed that 17-year-old young man from shooting up the place. University of Colorado at Boulder shows that the college pursued a race-based hiring program, which of course discriminates against the majority. Well, there have been several stories about, shock, tunnels underneath the border going into Juarez from El Paso. Well, in History of Mystery of El Paso, which I published, almost 10 years ago, I wrote about the tunnels. I did a video that you can find on the internet that I took down in the tunnels. For 20 years, I did ghost tours in El Paso until some geniuses bought my books, memorized my stories, and started holding themselves out as being me. But I was in several tunnels. In fact, I was invited to lunch by people from Homeland Security to discuss the tunnels. And this has been at least 10 years ago. They wanted me to tell them where the tunnels were, me to tell Homeland Security where the tunnels were so they could seal them up. And when I refused to be part of that, because I wanted to do tunnel tours, they stuck me with the lunch bill, said they were going to the restroom, didn't come back. But the shock of one tunnel being found. There are tunnels, half the buildings downtown are connected by tunnels. In fact, one building burned down, and when it was demolished, there was a metal door found in the basement. The owners of the building had put up the door to keep people from coming in from the tunnels. If you know how to do it, You can go out to Horizon City from downtown El Paso through the tunnels. I've published 67 books, and I've got a bunch more still to be published. But I write about lost treasures, ghosts, anything strange and unusual, such as the tunnels. These are not new tunnels. In fact, there are numerous opium dens under the city that date from the days of the Chinese. And all you have to do is get in to the first tunnel, and it's an interconnecting freeway. In fact, a story was told to me years ago when they redid the Sun Bowl field. There was one area near the 50-yard line that the grass wouldn't grow. And they brought in experts from all over. And they're standing there one day with a group of very expensive experts when the ground started to pooch up, like it had pressure underneath it. And then a section of grass flipped back, and two undocumenteds crawled out of a tunnel underneath the football field and went running down the field. The problem is, nobody takes the trouble to research. Now, where El Paso sits, it has been a hub for every type of smuggling anybody's indulged in. And a lot of it came through the tunnels. But nobody wanted to listen. Everybody had their own ideas. Well, we've been talking about ghosts and hauntings during World War II. Do you know there was a magical attempt to defeat the Nazis? Both sides used witches and warlocks. Done in secret, of course. But there's long been a story that England's witches and Wicaans united together to stop Hitler. In fact, it was suggested that Aleister Crowley, the wickedest man alive, actually used his power to have Rudolf Hess embark on his flight to Scotland. And it was Crowley that came up with the so-called two-finger salute that Winston Churchill dubbed the V for victory. And while Crowley used his magic power to attack Hitler's brain trust and counter the evil power of Nazi symbolism with his two-fingered salute, dozens of other supernaturally empowered British citizens were also taking up positions to keep England safe and ensure the Germans' pending Operation Sea Lion, which was their plan to invade the UK, never left the shores of France. Now, there are at least 3 stories about England's magical forces being mustered to defeat the Nazis. And like any discussion of supernatural intervention, the facts are a little difficult to separate from myth, but we're going to talk about the realistic bulldog response that England's witches and wizards and sorcerers and spiritual followers had on Germany's threats to land troops on the British Isles. According to Gerald Gardner, who was a pioneer in the religious movement we now know it as Wicca, it says that covens of witches turned out to magically battle Hitler's armies in the middle part of 1940, which was a particularly bleak time for England's war efforts. the Nazis had swarmed into France and installed the puppet Vichy regime. Luftwaffe began its air attacks on the UK, and German troops even occupied some of England's Channel Islands. Now, according to Gardner, covens of witches convened July 31st, 1940, in southern England right before the Nazi invasion was supposedly ordered to begin. And if what he had to say is correct, and if the witches' convention ever even happened at all, it would rank among the largest gathering of magical practitioners in modern history. The group that gathered in a section of New Forest, one of the last remaining tracts of open space and pasture land left in increasingly urbanized southern England, was massive, according to Gardner. He never gave any hard numbers. On how many witches and warlocks joined him in what he referred to as Operation Cone of Power. He did say, though, that the magical energy they put off was so massive he could feel the intensity like he'd been hit by a wind gust, or he'd perhaps touched a live wire. And besides the sheer number of practitioners, he said the witches had another advantage. The New Forest Cone, which spearheaded this magical assault, was among the most ancient and most powerful covens in Europe. It traced its lineage directly back to pre-Christian times. That was a time when people respected witches as elders and healers in the community. And they had a lot of experience, he said, dealing with invaders. Well, while millions of other Englishmen were being recruited for the pending war in Europe, Gardner said the English witches called him up as a soldier in their magical war. He said one of England's most powerful magicians initiated him into the New Forest Coven. And although she's referred to normally as Dorothy Clutterbuck, or Old Dorothy Clutterbuck, that name, he said, was a pseudonym, or according to critics, she may have just been one of Gardner's inside jokes. Now, there actually was a Dorothy Clutterbuck who lived about the time Gardner claimed to be initiated. But those who've read the woman's diaries and personal papers agree she seemed to have no connection with the occult, let alone the coven known to be operating in New Forest. Well, according to Gardner's story, he met with old Dorothy one September evening in 1939, right before the war started. She then required the initiate to strip naked and participate in a ritual. And according to Gardner, his initiation revealed that his scholarly journey to discover whether elements of the ancient Wicca religion still existed was well-founded. His ultimate destiny as a promoter of the religion was also revealed to him during the initiation. And his name became nearly synonymous with the founding of Wicca and modern witchcraft. And yes, folks, there are modern witches. According to Gardner, the witches from the New Forest Coven, as well as other covens throughout the country, gathered at night and formed what they called the Great Circle. They formed a cone of power, which, as the magician described it, generated a great vortex of magical energy. And according to Gardner, once that energy reached its peak, the combined force of witches aimed it at Berlin and the verbal instructions, "You cannot cross the sea. You cannot cross the sea. You cannot come. You cannot come." Well, Gardner and a few other occult experts say that the energy given off by that group was incredibly powerful. Some would say deadly. And they reported a few casualties. Some of the coven members and participants died, supposedly as a result of the energy expended that night. Others were stricken with pneumonia and were unable to fight off the disease because of their weakened immune systems. Still others are said to have died of heart failure. Well, skeptics and believers have and will debate whether these deaths had anything to do with the witches' participation in the gathering at New Forest. But history is emphatic that the Nazis, who were up to their armpits and with the hubris after blitzkrieging through Poland and France, ran into a series of misfortunes and miscalculations that made the short trip from the north of France into England nearly impossible. And then England's pilots beat back the air war. The German Navy, with all its immensely powerful submarine U-boats couldn't minimize the destructive power of the Royal Navy. And some historians even go so far as to say Hitler was afraid of the sea and began to lose his nerve. He once told his naval officers, according to reports, "On land I'm a hero, at sea I'm a coward." Well, and then too, the spell may have had one final disastrous effect on the Nazi regime. With the door to England closed by aircraft, naval craft, and witchcraft, he turned his war machine toward Russia. In what many refer to as a final fatal decision. The attack on Russia depleted precious resources and made a two-front war nearly unavoidable. There are those that say, had he not attacked Russia, he could eventually have worn England down. The question remains, did that historic slide from the dominant power to being defeated begin as a circle of wizards and witches gathered in the forest of England? Now, you might think that this story sounds oddly like the plot of the classic movie Bedknobs and Broomsticks. And that might be because there are indications that Gardner and Dorothy Clutterbuck both served as inspirations for at least some of the movie. Art imitates reality. Now, another of the magical warriors that the Allies drafted was named Dion Fortune. According to Garrett Knight in a book called The Magical Battle of Britain, Fortune might have been one of the earliest practitioners of psychotherapy. But she felt it didn't go far enough to explain things like telepathy and other forms of psychic powers. And her background in psychology and parapsychology made her keenly aware of the existence of what you might refer to as a group mind. And she recognized that the British citizens created a group mind and existed as England's greatest strength, as well as its most vulnerable target. Nazi propaganda and black magic was aimed directly at that group mind, and she took it upon herself to try to protect it. Now, during World War II, she rallied her followers with a continual barrage of letters designed to steal their hearts and lift their spirits. Perfect condition for magic to happen. Sent her first letter in October 1939. Had a very simple message. Kind of keep calm and magic on type of thing. It arrived in the postal boxes of members of the Fraternity of Inner Light, which was the name of the group that she led. The message came right on time as waves of Nazi bombers and fighter planes soared over the British Isles. It wasn't exactly a time brimming with confidence, and in fact, the spirit of gloom had taken over England and much of the West. Some might say it was a terrible time to test one's belief in magic. But it was suggested it was the perfect time because it was completely necessary. Now, the letters also invoke creative visualization exercises designed to accomplish their aims. She asked her members to visualize angelic protectors who were keeping England safe and their morale strong. And she included specific steps in her letters for meditation. Now, that may have violated some of the group's their own principles. These visualizations and meditation efforts magnified considerable spiritual power, forces it might term harmful if ill-used. But, as so many said, desperate times call for desperate measures. One thing that came out of those letters, she wrote, "Let us meditate on angels, presences, red-robed and armed, patrolling the length and breadth of our land. Visualize a map of Great Britain. Picture these great presences moving as a vast shadowy form along the coast and backward and forward from north to south and east to west, keeping watch and ward so that nothing alien can move unobserved." Well, if you break this down to its essential elements, the practice is based on a well-established occult principle, as above, so below. Or, more simplistically, consciousness creates conditions. The practitioners dwelled, heart, mind, and soul, on victory and peace, and the theory was that's what they'd get. Well, with members of her group scattered across the nation, some of whom were involved in a war effort, Fortune established regularly timed meditation sessions. Groups or individuals trying to meet every Sunday at the same time and in the same place. Participants who couldn't make the meetings were expected to participate in their ritual wherever they found themselves at the time, whether it was in a bunker spotting aircraft or in a barracks at home or wherever they might be. At a certain time, they took part in their ritual. She hoped this concentrated effort would help magnify the results of their attempts. Well, she also told them the visualizations and rituals made additional lines of defense. It wasn't a sole line of defense. She said the war has to be fought one on the physical plane before physical manifestation can be given to the archetypal ideals. Well, for Fortune, the collective magical effort during the war ended up, ironically, creating a long-term benefit. She said there were those with us in those days. Remember how we opened our doors and welcomed all who would sit in meditation with us and taught them the esoteric methods of mind working that had never been revealed before outside the veil of mysteries, and that work was done with a new view of bringing into manifestation those very ideas that are now manifesting. What part we played in their manifestation, we don't know, but we do know that fraternity has a voice crying in the wilderness, a cry that has now become a chorus. Well, the Allies were quite fortunate to have such a trained psychic warrior on their side. Claimed she was a victim of a psychic attack as a young woman and immediately wrote the manual on how to survive such an attack. It's called Psychic Self-Defense. What she may not have known at that time was this guide, which was basically a primer on self-defense against occult powers, would position her as the UK's Minister of Psychic Defense during this worldwide struggle against the greatest occult force of the modern era, the Nazi regime. Well, lest you think Britain was alone, the U.S. joined the war effort late, but when it did, it brought the full weight of its military prowess and industrial genius to the fight. And America also brought another weapon to the war, their spiritual warriors. Mr. Horowitz points out in his books, Occult America and One Simple Idea, while the U.S. is often recognized as a mainstream Christian country, the country's occult and magical practitioners have actually thrived beneath the surface of American culture. These belief systems include robust populations of Wiccans and spiritualists and positive thinkers and a lot of other adherents, often pushed to the margins of mainstream religious thought and philosophy. These spiritual seekers were frequently vanguards of cultural shifts and religious renewal. During World War II, in the fight against the Axis powers, Americans relied heavily on their reliable power of prayer, but many also explored the border of occult powers, especially in the realm of positive thinking philosophy called New Thought. It's a philosophy steeped in faith and optimism and self-reliance, main themes of American culture and philosophy. And New Thought can actually trace its origins to the country's transcendentalist movement, led by philosophers like Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau, even to the works and thoughts of founding fathers like Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin. But also included within New Thought is a hint of the occult. Later, the spiritualist movement has brought mediums and communing with spirits into seances, and the American mainstream probe for deeper interaction between mind and matter and spirit and destiny. Frank Robinson, often referred to as the mail order prophet, was one of these spiritual warriors, sculpted from the same American metaphysical material as Emerson and Thoreau. He was originally from England and a former Bible school student, rejected organized religion, formed his own New Thought group called Psychiana, based on Moscow, Idaho. believed in the power of prayer and affirmations. And like any other good prophet, he even claimed he talked to God. His most powerful weapon, though, was a thorough understanding of one of the most occult forces at work in the U.S. Marketing. Now, long before televangelist and e-commerce, he was advertising in mail order to spread the message of Psychiana. According to Horowitz, as Psychiana grew, Robinson kept up with thousands of correspondents who wrote him with personal questions or requests for prayer. That Idaho town's tiny post office was flooded with letters, sometimes postmarked no more than Psychiana, USA, or Dr. Robinson, Idaho, or even the man who talked with God in Idaho. Well, when World War II broke out, Robinson used both the power of the mind and the power of marketing to enlist his group members to join the fray, planning to use their psychic powers to defeat the Nazi and Japanese powers. Actually had experience dealing with fascists. Before the war, the mail-order minister's mind power message connected with an unlikely student. Italian dictator Benito Mussolini sent Robinson a letter praising Psychiana. Now, Robinson wasn't a fan of Mussolini, though Mussolini was a fan of Robinson. And when the conflict started, the prophet from Moscow, Idaho, attempted to sway his fascist fan with embarking on a war that would engulf the world. He publicly took Mussolini to task, telling him to refrain from joining Hitler in his crusade of madness. Unfortunately, that message was never answered. Now, getting a cold shoulder from Mussolini didn't cause Robinson to shirk from battling the forces of fascism. He turned Psychiana into an army against him, calling on his followers to become a blitzkrieg for God. According to Horowitz, Robinson sent the group members buttons with Hitler's image on it. On the button was a magic spell that read, "I'm helping to bring Hitler's defeat by repeating hourly the power of right will bring your speedy downfall." Well, Robinson also reached out to other allies facing a Nazi onslaught. He sent a message to Finland's leaders saying that the Psychiana members would join Finnish cabinet military members for 15-minute affirmation sessions. Now, during those sessions, he said they would affirm the power of God is superior to the powers of war, hate, and evil. And the prime minister of the country during the war, Risto Raiti, explained that they were prepared to enact the suggestion. Now, Robinson knew he and his Psychiana troops couldn't change the tide of war alone. They'd need help. He also knew that thousands of other loyal Americans who wanted the war to end were members of the New Thought and mind power groups. Horowitz wrote that Robinson and one of the movement's biggest names in the positive thinking philosophy joined forces to defeat the Axis powers. Ernest Holmes, who wrote the classic New Thought text Science of Mind, joined Robinson's crusade against the enemy regimes as the winds of war blew into World War II. The two prophets and their 3,500-strong collective legion of followers met at the Philharmonic Auditorium in Los Angeles in September 1941. Though most of the world had spun out of control and were deeply involved in the war, the U.S. remained on the sidelines. But Holmes and Robinson were preparing their team to join the fight. Robinson called the rally the Holmes-Robinson Spiritual Awakening, and at other times the American Spiritual Awakening, and invited all Americans to take part. And both spiritual leaders welcomed all religious beliefs and accepted people from all ethnicities and national origins. Definitely a stark contrast from the fascist enemies arrayed against the U.S. and its allies. And in his opening remarks to the crowd, Holmes outlines his acceptance of all religions in no uncertain terms. He said, "Some of you may go to a Jewish synagogue. You may be Methodist, Baptist, Catholic, but there's but one God. We meet here today not on a theological background, but on the foreground of a spiritual conception. The common meeting ground of every race, every creed, every color, every philosophy, and every religion on the face of the planet." He also appealed the group to realize the strength of diversity in their fight against Nazis. When Robinson spoke, he referred to the diverse audience as beloved. Well, Robinson did live to see that the psychic warfare on the Axis powers was apparently successful. The Wicaans and the power of the New Thought alliance he forged with Holmes didn't play a significant role in the reconciliation and reconstruction efforts of the post-war politics. Robinson died in October 1948, and essentially, Wicaans died with him. Holmes, though, made sure his science of mind doctrine would continue to soldier on. In fact, it's still functioning today. Robinson's mind power techniques to fight against terror and fascism would rise again as well. Paraphrasing the mail-order prophet, Horowitz created his own social media campaign in 2015 to unite his readers against terrorist group ISIS. Echoing Robinson, he posted on several social media outlets, "I'm inaugurating the same campaign against ISIS. Please join me in adapting Frank's slogan. I'm helping to bring about the immediate defeat of ISIS by repeating hourly, the power of right will bring about your speedy downfall." Then for social media, they had hashtag #MindOverISIS. Well, after nearly defeating the Allied powers in World War I, Germany's subsequent loss in World War I propelled the country into a state of economic and political ruin. And according to experts on the occult, it was clearly the spiritual ruin that pushed the once world-leading, culturally refined German people to the brink of complete annihilation in World War II. And a lot of experts on the occult suggest that Germany had become possessed. They were led by a madman who some claimed was demon-possessed himself. The Nazi Party first bowled its way onto Germany's political stage, and then, as if lifted by an evil wizard spell, or some would say curse, began to dominate the social, political, culture, and even spiritual values of the country. The black uniformed SAS and the fires that burned at the Reichstag seemed more like costumes and plot lines pulled from low-budget horror films than reality. And the Nazi soldiers and party leaders appeared to be more like dark arts masters involved in occult rituals than any type of governmental agency. So there had been the question raised, were the dark arts really involved? Now, among historians, this is a controversial subject, but it's not an argument about whether the occult influenced Nazism at all. Historians may argue about the extent of the occult, but they have to acknowledge that dark aspects of the occult infected the Nazi elite. And then, of course, there's another debate. Did this quest for magical power have any effect on Germany's success and failures during the war? Well, the Nazi Party itself can be seen as the bastard child of several occult movements that came into vogue during the years between the world wars. While critics often dismiss allegations of the party's occult ties as being overdone and merely reflective of German society at large, it's difficult to imagine that the Nazi Party could have formed and gained power without help and guidance from certain Germanic occult groups, especially the Thule Society. It's difficult to imagine the Nazis not usurping the memberships of these societies, since they clearly resonated with much of their ideology. And whether the Nazi Party grew as an extension of occult groups or vice versa is certainly something that can be debated, but what can't be debated is the extent to which this group spread in the dark days after World War I and before the even darker days of the German Nazi takeover. After leading members of the Nazi Party before Hitler's takeover in the 1930s were involved at various levels with groups such as the Thule Society. The occult group traces its origins to a disgruntled World War I veteran. Walter Newhouse began the organization as a study group, and it's no coincidence that the belief system he began to construct would interest leaders of the burgeoning Nazi movement. After all, both Newhouse and Adolf Hitler were World War I vets, anti-Semitic, art students, and very bitter about the war. Some Hitler biographers claim that Hitler joined the Thule Society. Others claim there isn't proof of that. But most historians do admit that leading party members Rudolf Hess and Hans Frank were definitely members. Other Nazis may have had more informal ties to the group, such as brief speaking appearances at the group's meetings. But still, the Thule Society's basic occult teachings must have served some purpose for the Nazis. Society members believed in a divine origin of the Aryan race, as did the Nazis' Third Reich. The deep and strident anti-Semitism of the society's mythology, which portrayed the Aryans as a people betrayed by Jews, lent itself well to Hitler's propaganda and his nationalist movement, which sought a scapegoat for Germany's loss in the war and its dire economic consequences. And Thule, by the way, was the name that ancient Roman and Greek geographers used when they referred to the northern edges of the known world. In today's world, we'd call that area Scandinavia. However, for the society's members, Thule had a magical origin. They believed that Thule was an island or landmass near Greenland or Iceland. The kingdom was the original home of the Aryan race. Members also believed that Plato's tale about Atlantis actually referred to Thule. Members must have seen the rise of Hitler and his ambitions for a Third Reich as a way to reanimate the lost kingdom of Thule. And then we have another fairly well-known occult group active before Hitler rose to power, and that was the Vril Society. And some historians who've studied the Nazis' occult activities say that a secret group espousing racial superiority and wielding magical power was actually pulling the strings of German society, leading the country even closer to worldwide conflagration. But like every occult Nazi mystery, the Vril Society, as the group is often called, is still cloaked in layers of secrecy and mystery and fraud and wrapped in tentacles of suspicion and paranoia. In fact, the society could be nothing more than a plot twist from a work of fiction called Vril, The Power of the Coming Race, by Edward Bulwer Lytton. According to this book, the master race lives inside the earth and has learned how to use a mysterious force called Vril. The force gives them awesome power to heal, as well as equally astonishing power to kill and destroy. Well, as an allegory, the tale of the Vril, or the people who possess the power of Vril, certainly sounds like the Nazi movement, which started in the substrata of society, among the outcasts and rejects of the class-conscious German culture. There was, and perhaps still are, a group of occultists who believe that this novel is a true account, not a work of fiction. They believe in the Vrilya, their power, and a group of humans who somehow established contact with these subterranean overlords. The story of the Vril wasn't just a folk legend passed down around in German villages. Some of the Vril believers were among the biggest names in the occult world at the time. People like Helena Blavatsky, founder of the Theosophical Society, and Rudolf Steiner, an occult leader who would later find himself and his alleged magical powers in the sights of Nazi magicians. The hard pieces of proof that believers of the Vril Nazi connection offer the unmatched success of German forces early in the war and their uncanny secret weapons program. Without Vril, the Nazis could never have defeated their enemies in Poland and France, and at least early in the war, in Russia. There are even those who suggest the Nazi movement reached its military peak because they found a way to tap into some Vril power and technology. Jet-powered weapons and missiles were developed and perfected by the Nazis long before the Allied forces got their hands on that technology. The notion of Vril also touches on something else that we'll talk about in future shows. Foo Fighters. Some people believe that the strange orbs that harassed and buzzed Allied fighter planes and bombers weren't flying ships from another planet, but secret weapons developed by Nazi engineers and magicians and fueled by Vril power. Well, critics of the Vril power theory, though, have one counter-argument that does carry a lot of weight. If they had this power behind them, why did the Nazis lose? Well, one answer to that, Vril power and all the other powers the Nazis tried to tap into wasn't just as powerful as the magical forces the Allies arrayed against Germany, because the Allies delved into magic as well, as we talked about earlier in the show. On that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be back tomorrow, and once again, we'll be talking about the strange and unusual. You'll be listening to Ken Hudnall on the Ken Hudnall Show. Until then, have a truly great evening.